Okay? Advent. Seasonal. I listened all day for the knock of the stranger, and I often looked out from the door. The table was scrubbed, the brass shining, and well swept the floor. The shadows grew longer and longer. In the grate the fire flickered and died. It's too late. He never will come now, I said, and sighed. I sat there musing and musing, the spinning wheel still at my side. The moonlight came in through the window, white like a bride. As the clock struck 12, I heard nothing, but felt he had come and stayed, waiting outside. And I listened, and I was afraid. So that's a poem by Sangharakshita, by Bhante, written probably sometime in the late 1940s, early 1950s in India during his wandering years in India. And it's one of my very favourite poems by Sangharakshita. It sort of conjures so much for me. I'm not quite sure of the inspiration for the poem. I don't think I've even talked to him about it, but it's possible that the inspiration was the poetry of Rabindranath Tagore and some of the Bengali devotional poetry that centres around Krishna, something like that. It's possible because the scene, it seems very feminine to me. It seems a very sort of feminine kind of poem. There's this house with someone in it. The house has been cleaned and scrubbed and made ready for a stranger, a guest. And it's a capital S for stranger. And the day goes on into the night, and the person waiting, the person who's made the house as it is obviously really longing for this stranger to visit, this guest to visit, because very often the stranger and the guest are the same thing in traditional India. The honoured guest is very often the stranger, the person who just sort of turns up. But obviously they were expecting this stranger, but they don't come. They don't come, and even long into the night, with the moon shining through and the fire going out, still the stranger isn't there. But then at midnight, in the depths of the night, he, and it's a capital H for he comes, standing, waiting outside, and the person in the house listens, or they rather feel that he, the stranger, is listening outside, and he feels afraid. The person in the house feels afraid. It's an amazing poem, and for me it's a really wonderful evocation of the spiritual life, of the Dharma life, especially perhaps on a meditation retreat. You know, here we are in our selves, in our houses of body and mind, and we do long, I think, all of us, to have some sort of encounter with a higher state of consciousness, whether you describe that as a he, or as a stranger, or as a person, or as the Buddha, or as dhyana. I'm sure that's why we're here. We want some sort of enlightenment, some sort of higher state. We long for something. And we're working away. We're working away on cleaning our house, sweeping its floor and scrubbing the table. And we're stilling all the kind of, the dreams that we weave, all the distractions. The spinning wheel in the poem is not moving. So we're stilling all that. We're quietening that down. We're musing and musing. We're going more deeply into meditation. Things are opening up. We're purifying. We're making ready this house of ourselves, this shrine room, which is our, as it were, collective self, waiting. And maybe we even have those moments of, or perhaps the promise of union, if not actual union. The moonlight shines through the window white like a bride, which is obviously a kind of image for union, for some sort of meeting, some sort of purity of consciousness. So maybe we're having those moments. And yet, when reality comes, when the stranger comes, when the Buddha comes, when the truth comes, when the Bodhisattva comes, when we realise that he, it, is there, waiting outside our house, our pure house, we feel frightened, we feel afraid, we shrink back. This moment of reality is so longed for, perhaps this angel of reality, so longed for, so sought after. When it actually comes, when we actually become aware of it, the response is very often fear. The response is very often wanting to shrink back, not to go outside of the door of the house, to follow that stranger wherever he will take you, to follow that angel, that truth, wherever it will take you, wherever it will lead. We prefer to stay in the house. We're frightened. And I think this is a really wonderful kind of evocation of the Dharma life. The stages of the path of, first of all, mindfulness and integration and positive emotion, the generation of metta, and especially with the devotion of the puja and the commitment that we made. I had quite a lot to say about commitment. All of that is wonderful and absolutely fundamental to a Dharma life. That we really engage our energy, our volition, our will. We really, really work and work and work to create this self, this house, if you like, this positive, expansive, refined, purified, integrated, open self, very dynamic. I'm really not bothered about using this word self at the moment. I think it's fine to use it. We're making it more and more transparent, more open, more receptive, more opened out. But we then have to give it up. We have to let it go. It has to die. And this is the next stage of the path. We need to engage in spiritual death, the processes of spiritual death, where we allow this wonderful self that we've developed to dissolve away, to open up to something even greater, to open up to something permanent, permanently transformative. Because at the moment, what's happening is we're developing ourselves, we're changing, we're making that house of the self more and more pure, more and more bright, but that won't last. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. You've probably noticed. Well, I noticed it today in the course of every day, actually, with the retreat. There's that bit of progress. And then you think, wow, fantastic. And then you come into the next meditation. Backache. I'm about to sneeze. My mind's going downhill rapidly. Happens to the best of us. Where did that go? What happened this morning? Where did that go? There's this sort of arising and passing away, arising and passing away. Hopefully there's something deeper going on. But nonetheless, because it's conditioned, because it's constructed, because we're building a house, a very positive Dharma house, a Dharma temple, if you like. Nonetheless, because it's constructed, it will arise and it will pass away. For there to be permanent change, permanent transformation, we have to spiritually die. We have to undergo spiritual death. We have to move beyond the egoistic will. We have to involve our egoistic will. We have to involve, our self-will in order to grow and to develop. To begin with, we have to make effort. But in the end, we've got to open up to something entirely different, to a whole different set of processes, if you like, which are not to do with our own self-construction. Very mysterious processes. That's why I love this poem, because it talks about the stranger. It doesn't talk about the Buddha. It talks about the stranger. We've got to open up, if you like, to what the Buddha really is, what the Dharma and the Sangha, what the Bodhisattvas really are, what reality, what enlightenment really is. Not our ideas about it, but what it really is. Even our ideas about the Dharma have to die in order to open up to this strange, mysterious dimension of the way things really are. And it is strange. It is weird. You do get sort of books saying, well, no, it's not. It's actually very ordinary. Well, it might be ordinary, but it's also very strange. I have to be very careful with this tendency, I think, in contemporary Buddhism to try and make enlightenment and the Dharma sound. Well, when people hear the word ordinary, well, they think it's just like ordinary consumerist life. If it is ordinary, it's ordinary in the weirdest sense possible. So we need to be very, very careful with this sort of very strong tendency in the West to sort of try and dumb down the Dharma, so that really, but this is just like everybody else with just a few knobs on. That's not it at all. We need to really appreciate the Buddha's teaching where he talks about the Dharma, and he doesn't just mean by the Dharma the path or the teaching, he means reality itself as being like the great and mighty ocean. The great and mighty ocean, with all sorts of qualities. And you have to understand that the Buddha and his disciples never saw the mighty ocean, because the mighty ocean is hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the area in which the Buddha taught. So the ocean was this mythic, vast body of water, vaster than the vastest part of the river Ganges, which can be pretty vast. But this is even vaster, that goes on and on and on endlessly, with depths and jewels and monsters and all sorts of strange and wonderful things within its endless depths. We need to have that sense of the strangeness of the Dharma, the strangeness of the Dharma. Just because we have all these words about the Dharma and about the Buddha and everything else, it doesn't mean that we know it. Those ideas about it have to die. So I want to try and approach this topic of spiritual death to talk about this. It's an interesting phrase of Sangharakshita's. In an earlier exposition of the path, he talked about it in using more traditional language, saying that this is the stage of vision, the path of vision, darshana marga, the path of seeing things as they really are, seeing reality face to face. And some people would prefer it if we just called it the stage of vision, of seeing things as they are. And I think the reason why Sangharakshita says no, spiritual death, is because he's trying to say what the effect of seeing things as they are has. And also the language of seeing things as they are, it can very easily be hijacked by the intellect. It's very easy to think you're seeing things as they really are, when actually you've just got a strong view, a strong idea of things as they really are. A real encounter with things as they are has got nothing to do with the intellect. Nothing to do with... The intellect might be doing preliminary work, but it's a total vision. A vision without any construction, any kind of intellectual support. It's a direct seeing. And when I say direct, it's a seeing without the viewer and what's seen, without inside or outside. So if it's an encounter with impermanence, it's not just observing impermanence, it's the total taste and experience of impermanence, inside and outside. It's absolutely total, without any exception, without anything left out. If it's a real insight into not self, it's not observing the insubstantiality of things. It's the total experience of the insubstantiality of all phenomena, of self and other, and of all things. If you like, the experience is as much to do with you could as much as well say, as use the metaphor of vision, you could use the metaphor of a total bodily experience. And I don't just mean body in the physical sense, I mean kaya in the sense of, if you like, the whole psychophysical entity, if you like. It's a bit like when you have a very powerful dream and you're totally involved in that dream, and there's total sort of transparency between you and the events of the dream. There's nothing left out. But it seems to me that's much more of an accurate description of the encounter with things as they are than the language of vision, even though the language of vision brings out the directness of the encounter. But it's much, much more than that. So it's going to be transfigurative. It's going to be transforming. And it's going to result in death. It's going to result in spiritual death, in the dropping away of many things. In the end, the dropping away of our entirely conditioned and constructed framework that we've held together for so many lives and so many centuries. That all drops away. But certainly, there's going to be on the way to that. There's going to be things dropping away, and I think that's why it's very important to relate any kind of vision or penetration of the Dharma to what is dropping away. What is dropping away? In the Eightfold Path lecture that I was referencing in the talk the other day, Sangharakshita talks about, as one of the positive emotions under perfect emotion, is nekkhamma, which means something like contentment. And he related that to renunciation. And he said that if you're asked, if you wanted to sort of see what your progress is on the path, the first thing to look at is, what have you given up? What have you given up? What has dropped away since you became a Buddhist? What's actually dropped away? Has negative emotion dropped away? Has excessive materialism dropped away? Has anger dropped away? And so on and so forth. If things aren't dropping away, if you're pretty much the same person, it means that your Dharma life is rather shallow. It's not going deep enough. Even if you think that you've had some sort of insight into the Dharma, if certain things haven't dropped away, you haven't really seen. You might have seen intellectually, but you haven't felt on the pulses, the teaching of the Buddha, the teaching of the Dharma. So spiritual death is to do with looking at the impact of an encounter with reality and on us, and what drops away. So I want to look at that a little bit, very simply, in a very, very simple way. I want to look at and it's certainly very topical at this time of year. I want to look at impermanence and death a little bit, because there is a connection. We talk about spiritual death, but in order for there to be a spiritual death, there has to be a contemplation of actual death. There's a very strong relationship, if you like, between the reality of life and death and rebirth, of the wheel, the endless round. We're trying to make that conscious, if you like. We're trying to get hold of that so it becomes a spiritual death and a spiritual rebirth, and in the end, the transcendence of life and death. That's what's going on here. So I want to look at spiritual death in terms of looking at impermanence. So this is such a classic Buddhist teaching, the impermanence of absolutely everything. And in the meditations on impermanence, the tradition says, I think Bhante said this to you, didn't he, Sacharaja, that especially the Tibetan tradition, they emphasize that you reflect on the impermanence of absolutely everything. From the formation of cosmoses, cosmoses coming into being to passing away, right down to, the flower fading, right back to yourself. So that you're in absolutely no doubt that there is nothing that resists impermanence. Nothing that resists impermanence. And of course you can start, the beautiful thing about this teaching is that you start with what is in front of your very eyes. The great Dogen, the great Soto Zen master, who is one of our inspirations, he's one of the figures on our refuge tree in his primer of Soto Zen, says, you don't have to be clever to contemplate impermanence. It's not about thinking about something and then unthinking about it. He says impermanence is a fact before our very eyes. It's right there before us. It's right there within us. As he says, we're born in the morning and we die in the evening. The man we saw yesterday is no more. We just have to contemplate it right before our eyes, within our own experience. And of course, this is a wonderful time of year for the contemplation of impermanence. And Sacharaj has been recommending that. Seeing the bare trees. Watch those leaves being blown off the trees. The last leaf sometimes. That dry leaf being blown by the wind. Well, really reflect on that. That's teaching you the whole story, the whole reality of impermanence, and even apply it to your own actual experience. You don't even have to do intensive meditation in the shrine room on impermanence. You take what you've gained here, walk along the lane and just look. Look at the mud, look at the way the reeds are rotting down, smell the smells of decay. Really, really notice all that. Notice the last red berries on the bare trees and how they get more and more shriveled with the frosts. It's a very beautiful scene. It's a very lovely scene, but it is telling us about impermanence. And we need to make us, and we are also part of the scene. We will also one day be blighted by frost. We will one day, if not rot into the ground, certainly end up as just ashes and dust and bits of bone. That is actually our reality. That's the reality of all around us. This can become, of course, quite a frightening prospect, especially as Dogen goes on and he says things like, "You are only alive right now." A wonderful insight, as only Dogen can do it. You are only alive right now. In the next moment you could be dead. You are only alive right now. It's a wonderful reflection in meditation, especially just sitting. I use it quite often in my meditation when I'm spacing out. There's a sort of voice which sort of, shouts in my mind, "You are only alive right now." And it's great. Suddenly you're right on the edge of your seat and awake. But of course, these kinds of reflections need to take place within the context of lots of mindfulness, metta, relaxation, puja, devotion, the warmth of Sangha and spiritual friendship. Because in those moments, if you look at them, you realise how alone you are. You realise that you are only a traveller, that we are only travellers in this world. As Shantideva says, we are born alone and we die alone. And one day 4 strong men will take us on their shoulders, into the, he says, into the cremation ground, as in ancient India. That's our situation. All of us are travellers, and he uses wonderful imagery that this world is just like the market towns of the trading posts of existence, as he calls it. We think that this is a life, and a civilization, and a country and a coming together, and of course from a certain point of view it is. But in the general scheme of things, we are perpetual travellers, completely alone. Even though we have intimate family relationships, intimate friendships within the Sangha, and that's a very wonderful thing that we need to treasure, but we need to treasure it precisely because we're completely alone. We're completely alone. And when we're meditating, of course, we're completely alone, even though we're together, supporting one another. It's our practice, where we're experiencing ourselves as the travellers moving through the trading posts of existence, looking into the nature of life, and particularly contemplating its change and impermanence. Death meditation is explored very, very thoroughly in the tradition, in all traditions. It's very important to approach it, again, with metta and kindness and devotion and strength, and without any sort of trace of nihilism or anything like that. It's very, very important. If that sort of starts coming into your mind, you really need to not meditate on death. But I want to mention the death meditations, at least a little bit about them, because, well, the fact is, whether we're Buddhists or not, whether we meditate or not, wherever we are, that is intrinsic to human life. Part of human life is dying. None of us can avoid that. And perhaps one of the reasons why we came to the Dharma in the first place was because on some sort of level or other, we're aware of death. We're aware of passing. Well, I know some people here, they've told me that death of loved ones had a huge effect on them coming to the Dharma. You know, and it prompts the question, what is this life for? If it's going to end in death, what is this life for? What should I do? How to live? What to do? How to be? What is the best way to be? Death is the great clarifier of things, a clarifier of our existence. And at this time of year, in the dark, you know, with the bare trees, this is the classic time of year to meditate on death, yes, and rebirth. So there's three routes to the traditional Tibetan meditations on death. The first is the inevitability of death, being absolutely clear that we will die. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Nobody cheats death. And they say even the Buddha, even the great enlightened Buddha, you know, who, you know, presumably being enlightened, you know, you could do some sort of yogic thing to go on forever, but he couldn't. Even he didn't. Even he entered parinirvana. Even his physical body passed away. He might have transcended birth and death, whatever that means. He might have found the answer to it all by attaining the deathless, which isn't just suspended animation. That's not what it is. It's a deeply mysterious state, the deathless, the amrita, the nectar of immortality. But he entered parinirvana. His physical body dropped away. He aged. He was a very sick man at the end of his life. He died. He passed away. So we need to really get hold of the inevitability of our death. We will not be able to cheat it. It will happen. And then the next meditation is that death is not only inevitable, its time is uncertain. Its time is uncertain. And again, even the Buddha doesn't know the course of a man's life. Nobody knows the length of a man's life. There are all sorts of circumstances that could bring about our immediate dissolution. And again, when you contemplate like this, it's very, very important to bring to this lots of metta, lots of faith, lots of devotion. But it's a fact. We can die at any moment. And we need to, well, we then immediately go to the next reflection, and that is that at the time of death, the only reliable thing is the Dharma. The only thing that you can rely on is the Dharma. The only thing that you can rely on is your practice. The only thing that you can rely on is awareness and loving kindness and compassion and faith and devotion and mindfulness and presence. That's the only thing. It's going to be entirely dependent on your preparation. So don't waste time now on fruitless pursuits. Don't waste time indulging in negative emotion. Be fully, positively present right now, so that when the moment of death comes, you enter it at least with curiosity, at least with confidence, at least with some inspiration, at least with that, at the very least with that, maybe even more than that. That's what you're looking for. It's a very, very powerful way of practicing. I remember a solitary retreat I did a few years ago, and I was doing this meditation regularly after lots of mindfulness and metta and puja and all the rest of it. And I was going for a walk, and as often happens to me on solitary retreats or when I'm doing meditations, is that I often get into arguments with an imaginary person. Actually it's a real person, but it's some disagreement they're wrong about something, and I'm right. So I'm walking along with this narrative going along, trying not to verbalise it out loud in case I bump into somebody and they think I'm nuts. And I was walking along, and suddenly I thought, supposing you die now? Oh, goodness. Supposing you died while you were having that stream of thoughts. What a way to end. What a way to go. You're actually having an argument with somebody who's not there. I mean, it would be be a bit more understandable if it was somebody in front of you, but somebody not there about actually something that's never happened. So is this just me? Maybe it's just me. It's my particular madness. Honestly, you think, and it just seems so pathetic, so shameful. But this is what can happen. Our last thought, our last words. Well, the thing is, they might just be so banal. You know what I mean? It would be all right if they were, they had a bit of real life to them. But it might be, I don't know, an advertising jingle, or thoughts about, maybe I'll get that iPad or that new pair of jeans. There you are, a serious practitioner, and you're going out, with a consumer mentality in your head. That's what you're going out with, or an old drum and bass number, Sangharakshita. So this kind of reflection, really, the whole idea is that a meditation on death is so that we live with real meaning and purpose. With real meaning and purpose. We live in a way that is creative. That is creative to whatever is arising. Because the fact is actually life and death are going on all the time. There's a constant arising and passing away of phenomena both outside and inside. So it's happening all the time. And yes, this moment could be our last moment. So let's not waste time on trivial things. It's very interesting when a death happens, you suddenly have a very different scale of what's valuable. I remember when my father died, suddenly a lot of the things that I thought were meaningful were completely meaningless. I remember even sitting in a meeting with other very senior order members, talking about the future of the order and all this sort of thing. And I wanted to say, hang on, this is all rubbish. My dad's just died. This is all meaningless. My dad's just died. That's the real thing that's happened. All this is just, it might be about Buddhism, it might be about the Dharma and all the rest of it, and how we organise it and so on. But in the general scheme of things, my dad's just died. This is a death to me. It's not just he's died. Something in me has died. Something has happened. It fades. But I really noticed that, that there would be these conversations going on. And I want to say, hang on, you don't know that my dad's died. And of course, why should they? They didn't know my dad and so on. But I think when a death happens, or if we get seriously ill or something like that, what we regard as important changes, completely changes. That's very interesting information, I think. But we've got to bring that into our life before these things happen, before serious illness happens, before there's a death, before there's our death, we need to bring those reflections into our mind and to live in the face of death without panic. Was it saying Sangharakshita? True, life is short, but no need to be in a hurry. Which I think is brilliant. You say, yes, life is short and uncertain, but that doesn't mean you go and get frenetic and neurotic. You relax, you face it, you do what is the most meaningful thing. You live for the Dharma. The Buddha is wonderfully clear, wonderfully, beautifully clear about, in one of his teachings, on the effects of seeing into the nature of death. And it's one of those teachings where I know that the Buddha has transcendental wisdom. I'm really confident that this is transcendental wisdom. And I think it's one of those teachings that's so simple and so elegant, and we could well do with reflecting on it. And you see how uncomplicated seeing things really are, is. He says, others do not realise that we are all heading for death. Those who do realise it will end their quarrels. This is just so profound. Others do not realise that we're all heading for death. Those who do realise it will end their quarrels. I think that is so elegant, so pure. In other words, if you've seen that you will die, that others will die, there will be no more quarrelling. No more arguments. No more ill will. No more aversion. And to do that, of course, you have to have metta. You have to be striving for metta and friendliness and connection all the time. And also, of course, apologising where you need to apologise, forgiving where you need to forgive. If we live in this awareness of death, we will not get into situations where we're falling out with people. We'll not be getting into those situations. We'll not be holding on to grudges of any kind. All those things will be resolved because we know that we or they could die at any time. And if we die or they die before a resolution, it's going to make it extremely difficult to resolve. It's going to make it impossible in this life. You might be able to do a lot of good work within your own consciousness, but with that living person, it can't be done. I find this very, very sobering, very salutary. And the Buddha is connecting very, very powerfully insight into death and impermanence with metta, with love. He's making that connection very, very strongly. It's as if he's saying, well, okay, when what dies through seeing that everything, that we're all going to die, what dies is your tendency to quarrel, to get into arguments with people. That drops away, that dies. And what emerges, what is reborn, is constant loving kindness, constant metta in all that you do. That's a very simple statement of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. We probably, don't need any more than that, actually. It's that simple, it's that direct. And I must say it's a teaching that I go back to again and again, at least intellectually. I mean, turning it into a living experience is a bigger challenge because of conceit. And that's the next thing I want to come on to. I want to come on to conceit, because the classic practice that Sangharakshita has recommended to us within the order, we generally don't teach it outside of the order, for spiritual death is a meditation called the Contemplation of the Six Elements, where in this, I'm not going to go into the details of the practice because that wouldn't be appropriate, but basically what you're meditating on here, to remove conceit in the sense of you having a view, a very strongly held view of yourself as being superior to others, inferior to others, or even equal to others. That's conceit in Buddhism. A view, a strongly held view that you are in a position, a fixed position in relation to other people. looking down on, looking up to, in the sense of feeling inferior, feeling superior, or even feeling equal. All that are ways of sort of shoring up a fixed idea of yourself. And if you have that fixed idea of yourself, that limits your growth. To the extent that you have it, to that extent you're holding yourself back. People see this particularly with the view that they're inferior. A lot of people find this, particularly it comes up on a meditation retreat when you have one of those bad sessions, like I had this morning. I had one of those bad sessions, and there was a view going on in my mind. Oh God, 7 days of this. 7 days, come on, never mind. Reasons to be cheerful. It's a lovely day. Go for a walk. 7 days of this. This is, backache. All the rest of it. Of you. No sort of awareness of the ever-changing processes of life. Of you. Padmavajra is always going to be rubbish in meditation and miserable. Of you. I can put a brave face on these things, but it was there. But then what happens this afternoon? Magic. Unfolding, and wonderful things are happening, and it's really blissful and lovely and all the rest of it. And of course, there's another view coming in. I can sort of feel it. I could almost see it happening. Oh, great. 7 days of just... wow. It's all possible now, isn't it? A conceit. Amazing, isn't it? The way we did, rather than just enjoying it, I can meditate too. I can sit on afterwards as well. I'm one of the big boys. Yeah. Conceit of you. So, we go through these ups and downs, and we sort of latch onto them. So this meditation of the 6 elements is basically going through the body and consciousness, and seeing that there is actually no fixed and unchanging self anywhere in any of this construction, and you use the elements of earth, water, fire, and air, and space and consciousness to do that. It's a very, very beautiful practice, and apart from anything else, it also you meditate on your profound interconnection with the elements around you, and you realise that there's no separation. But one of the meditations here, the reflection that I have in this, that I find very fruitful, very helpful, is a meditation that goes with this on. Well, it's all about ownership. What do we own? And in relation to that, another reflection, mastery or lordship. Lordship. Sangharakshita has pointed out in his book, The Survey of Buddhism, that generally in Indian thought, the notion of selfhood is tied up with the notion of what you can have mastery over. It's tied up with the notion of Ishvara. Ishvara means Lord or Master. And if you have mastery or ownership or lordship of something, then that is a self. That can be regarded as a real self. Well, for some reason I find this a really interesting meditation. What am I master of within my experience? And I sometimes just go through the body like, well, I don't have any say in the beating of my heart. That goes to its own rhythms. I mean, no doubt, if I got into difficulties and, I breathed more deeply, I might be able to slow it down a bit or whatever. But basically, in the end, I'm not thinking to make my heart beat. It's just going on. It's part of these processes of, involving, blood pulsing through the body and all the rest of it. I don't know what the chemicals in my brain are doing, or what the chemicals, of my digestion are doing. If you go through it, actually you start to realise, I do not really have a lot of mastery of this body. And what about my mind? Well, there's all sorts of things. Also I suffer a bit from back pain, and I can't make that go away. So I don't have mastery over that. I can do exercises to make it a bit easier, but I don't have mastery over it. I'd like it not to be there, but it's there. And then what about the mind? You know, well, we think, well, I've got mastery over my mind. Oh, yeah? Is that right? Well, you know, in meditation, is that true? Have you got mastery over your mind? Metabhavna, developing loving kindness. I don't think so. You know, when you've got that fourth stage person, even the first stage person, you know, all the rest of it. You know, the mind just will not do what it's told. You know, and, well, who's doing the telling, etc., etc. So we actually have very little mastery, very little lordship over ourselves. Obviously, again, this all has to be held within a lot of metta and a lot of mindfulness. But it's a wonderful practice if you get into it, because, well, you start relaxing and relaxing and relaxing and letting go of your will. You know, and I think this was something that we're doing in the just sitting practice, letting go of always trying to mould and form what's happening to whatever end, and opening and opening and opening. But there's another aspect to this business of seeing through. That we are not the masters of ourselves. We're also paupers. We are, in Buddhist tradition, we need to realise that we are men of nothing, men of naught, akinchanas. This is a great realisation, apparently, of some of the arahants. They realise that they are men of nothing. In other words, they do not have a fixed and permanent being that makes them something. They are men of nothing. This is what the symbolism of the robes and the begging bowl are said to be all about. Yes, the Buddha did take the renunciant's rag robes. He took the begging bowl. But they also symbolise a state of holding to nothing whatever, as it says in the Heart Sutra. I've sometimes reflected that why is there so much emphasis on material things in our culture? Well, the world over, you know, beyond what we need. It's because there's a level on which we realise that we don't have anything. That we don't have anything. We don't own ourselves. We are men of nothing. We are men of, actually our state is one of real poverty, indigence. We're men of naught. And this sort of realisation comes very, very strongly with the six element practice. As you go through it, you don't own even your body. You don't own even your mind. And this is also, sorry to bring this reference in to some of my friends, you know, I'm apologising in advance to friends. In Sufism, you get this kind of experience as well. You've probably all heard this word dervish, and people think it's to do with the whirlers, the followers of Rumi. It's nothing to do with that. Dervish means those who are poor. And it's a state. It's a state of reeling your utter existential poverty. That you don't own anything, that you don't have anything. This is exactly the same as the Buddha in the Dhammapada says, the fool thinks, or the spiritually immature thinks, sons are mine, wealth is mine. The fool, the spiritually immature man, he doesn't realise that even his self is not his own. So we're all actually paupers. You know, and all the attempts to gather wealth around us that we do are just covering up that existential poverty. You know, we're not going to fix it through materialism. We're only going to be able to face this by actually embracing it. Embracing it, the fact that we do not have any kind of permanent self or any kind of ownership of anything. It's all impermanence. It's all insubstantial. This can be quite a powerful, even overwhelming experience. One of the very great Iranian Sufi masters, Muhammad Lahiji, talks about one of his visionary experiences. And in this visionary experience, he says, I suddenly found myself passing through a world, floating through a world, flying over a world of wonderful colours, iridescent and jewel-like, deserts and mountains of green and yellow and red and blue. And I felt a consuming, overwhelming longing to go to these places, to go to this visionary world. And at that moment, suddenly, a black light, a blazing, dazzling darkness overwhelmed the entire experience. Everything was swallowed up in this black light, this blazing, dazzling darkness, this sun at midnight, this darkness at noonday. Everything was swallowed up. I lost consciousness and heard a voice that said, within the darkness is found the water of life. So it could be when we approach these experiences, when we contemplate deeply the nature of our poverty, our lack of ownership, our lack of selfhood, it might be that we have these sorts of overwhelming experiences. No wonder Sangharakshita refers to this experience of fear. And in fact, in his original lecture talking about the stages of the path, he said sometimes in meditation you can feel a deep primal fear. A deep primal fear. He said that is the breath of shunyata. It's the breath of emptiness. It's the breath of the emptiness of the whole of existence. And you're feeling it. It's breathing on you, and it can be very frightening and overwhelming, but you need to sit with it. You need to sit with it very, very positively, not shrink back, but to sit with it, to face it. You're being changed. You're being reformed. There's a new reality opening up to you. You don't know what the other side is yet, but you need to sit with it. If it's too overwhelming, go to a spiritual friend. Talk to a spiritual friend. Get them to stand with you shoulder to shoulder within that. This can happen. Even if you're not meditating on these things that I've talked about, they can still happen, because every meditation, every kind of Buddhist meditation is predicated on the notion of change. Every meditation, in a sense, in Buddhism is an insight meditation, because it's assuming that everything can be changed and transformed. And it could be that you also enter not just fear, but you might start to worry that you're going, mad, or you get perplexed. You don't know what's going on. All of your kind of signposts and even your ideas about the Dharma seem to have gone. You seem to be suddenly walking in a wilderness, and there doesn't seem to be any particular direction. Sometimes these things can be precipitated, not just through your meditation practice, but through life experience. Loved ones leaving you, being let down by people, maybe criticisms from people, disappointments, feelings of betrayal, that kind of thing. Suddenly everything is thrown up in the air. These can be extremely positive experiences. There might even be experiences of humiliation. Bhante's talked very positively about this, of being humbled, of being brought to the end of your will. Your life is going well, your Dharma life is going well, and then suddenly something happens and you're shown how small you are in comparison with the vast reality of the Dharma. So these sorts of things that can happen. You might not understand what's going on. So another little passage from one of Sangharakshita's writings, which goes like this. It's from a long poem called On Glastonbury Tor. Just a few lines. Oh, but what if there were nothing to understand, nothing to learn? What if we had simply to accept incomprehension, accept defeat, accept collapse, disintegration, death, face dissolution of the mind, abdication of reason, erasure of what can be weighed, numbered, measured, sensed, known, face descent into hell without hope of resurrection on the third day. Are we prepared for this? It can sometimes be like that with this phase of spiritual death. I'm using this word spiritual death really glibly, actually, in a way saying too much about it. But when the oncomings come, well, it can be like that. You don't know that what you're going through is positive at the time. You don't know. All the signposts have gone away. It really is like the tiger's cave that the Zen masters talk about, where there are tracks leading up to the cave, but there are no tracks coming out. And it can seem, when you're in that phase of spiritual death, that you are in that cave and there's a tiger breathing on the back of your neck. It can be, and you don't know whether you're going to get out. So that's something on spiritual death, a little bit on spiritual death, just a few signposts there. You can see, again, to reiterate, why Sangharakshita insists that any kind of contemplation of reality, any kind of approach to spiritual death, must be done in the context of lots of mindfulness, lots of metta, lots of puja, and a committed life. A committed life. It's only a committed life where you've entrusted yourself to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, where the refuges are vivid to you, that can make sense of this. Without that, you could be destroyed, or you just lose interest, or whatever. And also, of course, a big part of that is spiritual friendship. Really good, wise, intelligent friends, who can be with you, when you're going through this. But beyond spiritual death, there is spiritual rebirth. So I want to say a little bit about spiritual rebirth. Well, it's hard enough to talk about spiritual death. It's even harder to talk about spiritual rebirth. Within our own order, the practices that are associated with spiritual rebirth in particular are the meditations on the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And when you're ordained, you're initiated into a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure that you have a very deep feeling for. And Sangharakshita insists that these figures, and when you make a commitment to a meditation like this, when you take on a meditation like this, what you're contemplating is you. Is you reborn? Is you the other side, beyond, as it were, the tiger's cave, beyond the desert, beyond, it's you, as it were, reborn, resurrected, transfigured. If you allow yourself to die, you will become this. You will become the Buddha. You will become Vajrasattva. You will become Manjughosha, Padmasambhava, whatever it might be. And, when you take a practice like this, it comes out of deep feeling, deeper than feeling. It's like taking on a deep myth. It's taking on your story, your deep form, if you like, your deep gestalt or archetype in the original medieval sense, not in the Jungian sense. It's, if you like, that portion of eternity, the deathless, has come to you, has broken through, even before you undergo full spiritual death, and is communicating to you, is talking to you, is showing themselves and saying, live like this. Live like this. Well, sometimes they're trying to break through. They're really trying to break through. And I'm just going to read you something. Again, I'm sorry to say it's from a Sufi text. But it's the same idea. This is the other side talking to you. The other side trying to break through to you. And that we all have this other side, this deep, profound quality, if you like, connection with enlightenment. We tend to think of our Dharma life as us going forward. Then we'll have the breakthrough. And it's all us doing it. But why not? Why not? Why shouldn't there be Buddhas, Bodhisattvas coming through, breaking through? I mean, the Buddha certainly had to do that with people. He described himself as being like the chick that's first out of the egg, who goes back to peck on the eggs of his brothers and sisters to help them break out. Well, why not? There might well be something breaking through, talking to you. Maybe you've had little glimpses of that quality, that Buddha, that Bodhisattva communicating to you, breaking through into you. Well, you need to open up to that, because that's going to be your life, your new life. That is the water of life. That is the nectar of the deathless. So this is that side talking to us. Listen, O dearly beloved, I am the reality of the world, the centre of the circumference. I am the parts and the whole. I am the will established between heaven and earth. I have created perception in you only in order to be the object of my perception. If then you perceive me, you perceive yourself. But you cannot perceive me through yourself. It is through my eyes that you see me and see yourself. Through your eyes you cannot see me. Dearly beloved, I have called you so often, and you have not heard me. I have shown myself to you so often, and you have not seen me. I have made myself fragrant so often, and you have not smelled me. Savoureth food, and you have not tasted me. Why can you not reach me through the object you touch, or breathe me through sweet perfumes? Why do you not see me? Why do you not hear me? Why? For you, my delights surpass all other delights, and the pleasure I procure you surpasses all other pleasures. For you, I am preferable to all other good things. I am beauty. I am grace. Love me alone. Love yourself in me alone. Attach yourself to me. No one is more inward than I. Others love you for their own sakes. I love you for yourself, and you flee from me. Dearly beloved, you cannot treat me fairly, for if you approach me, it is because I have approached you. I am nearer to you than yourself, than your soul, than your breath. Who among creatures would treat you as I do? I want you to belong to no other, not even to yourself. Be mine. Be for me as you are in me, though you are not even aware of it. Dearly beloved, let us go toward union, and if we find the road that leads to separation, we will destroy separation. Let us go hand in hand. Let us enter the presence of truth. Let it be our judge, and imprint its seal upon our union forever. I really love that whole idea that there's something, the stranger is trying to connect, the Buddha is trying to connect. So maybe when you're just sitting, when you're doing your puja, rather than thinking of you doing something to from yourself, try and open up to what's coming to you from outside. What's coming to you from outside? We're told that reality is beyond self and other, subject and object. It transcends that. So what would it mean if you experienced that? Probably, that would be so strange to experience beyond self and other. It would be experienced as other, as something strange and wonderful. Before I conclude, I want to mention just one more thing about death and rebirth, spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, and it's important. And it's connecting spiritual death and spiritual rebirth and the life of compassion, the Bodhisattva's life. And it's about a great spiritual death and a great spiritual rebirth. It's the well-known story of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion. So Avalokiteshvara, in this story, was a great bodhisattva, a yogi. And you see the depictions of this form of Avalokiteshvara with extremely handsome yogi with his hair piled up and long black hair and wearing a deerskin cloak. Not that he'd killed the deer, of course. It had come to him. and wandering around, and his teacher was Amitabha. Amitabha, the great Buddha. And Avalokiteshvara, the great yogi, the great lord of yogis, took a great vow in front of Amitabha that he was going to practice the Dharma, practice meditation, practice teaching the Dharma, and if just for a moment he thought of his own welfare, if he wasn't concentrated, he decided to make his practice totally the service of others until all were liberated from suffering, all were taken to the realm of great bliss, to nirvana. But if for a moment in his life, in his practice, in any meditation, in any activity, he thought just for a moment of giving up and just looking after himself, only being concerned with his own welfare, may his head shatter into pieces and may his body just be ripped up, broken apart, torn up. A great vow which Amitabha witnessed, his preceptor, his guru, witnessed fully, completely. So he lived his life meditating on Mount Potala, in the jungles, developing all the time love, powerful love and compassion, magical love and compassion. He went out among the people, teaching them the Dharma, teaching them how to practice, carried on like this, and then one day he surveyed his work, what he'd done, and just saw that, well, hardly anybody was liberated at all through all his efforts. He'd done all this work and nothing seemed to have shifted. It was just, people were just as they are. And just for a moment he thought, what's the point? Why don't I just pursue the yogi's life alone? But because of his great vow, and because he was a great yogi and his words were true words, magical words, the vow was enacted. Suddenly he started to shatter. He started to feel this terrible pain in his head as it started to break up into pieces. He started to feel the terrible pain in his body as it was just being ripped apart by the sheer force of his oath, just breaking up. And in his pain he cried out to the only being, person that he could think of who could save him, and that was, of course, was Amitabha. He called out, "Oh, Amitabha, save me." And Amitabha appeared and made this wonderfully cryptic saying. He said, everything comes about through conditioned co-production. Everything arises in dependence upon conditions. Your great vow has not been in vain. And he put his hands on the broken, the shattered body of Avalokiteshvara and reformed him. So this broken being was reformed into a new being, an extraordinary being. Avalokiteshvara became a being with 11 heads to survey the entire cosmos. Amitabha placing his own head on the crown so that there would always be that awareness of the teacher and the teacher's wisdom. But these 11 heads to look everywhere, and all of the broken pieces of the body were fashioned into wonderful arms, 1,000 arms, 100,000 arms, each with an eye of wisdom, and each hand reaching out to benefit every single kind of being imaginable. He formed, in other words, Avalokiteshvara into a being that is entirely beyond self and other. Entirely beyond. So that Avalokiteshvara is no longer a individual yogi or person. He's more like a force, a consciousness, a transpersonal stream of spiritual energy, of Dharma energy, working for the good of the world. The bodhicitta that will manifest in and through anybody, everybody, to bring about the liberation, the spiritual rebirth of all living beings. And in our own Sangha, this image is extraordinarily important, because Sangharakshita sees our own order as a reflection, a pale reflection at its very best, of the 11-headed and thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara. Our order is, what it should be doing, if it's truly living up to Sangharakshita's vision of it, is one body, one community spread, a growing community spread throughout the world, but working in complete harmony for the liberation of all life, the liberation of all beings. And we can actually have an experience of that on a retreat like this. Seems strange to say that. We're going to be in silence. We're going to be meditating together. We're going into full silence. But we're meditating for each other. We're meditating for everybody out there. We're meditating like Avalokiteshvara to bring the Dharma into the world. This isn't just our personal retreat for our own spiritual death and rebirth. This is our retreat to bring about the spiritual death and the spiritual rebirth of all life. So remember that as you practice over the coming days.
Thank you.